Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The night that changed everything started like any other Saturday in October 2019. I was 17, a junior at Millbrook High, and had been working part-time at the local grocery store to save up for a car. Life was pretty routine: school, work, hanging out with friends on weekends. That particular Saturday, our sleepy little town was buzzing with excitement because a traveling carnival had set up in the old parking lot behind the abandoned Sears. These carnivals always brought a certain energy with them: the flashing lights, the screaming from the rides, the smell of cotton candy and popcorn that seemed to cling to everything. I'd been planning to go with my three closest friends: Ashley, who lived 2 houses down from me, Kevin from my math class, and Tyler, who I'd known since elementary school. We'd all chipped in our tip money and allowances, and our parents had actually agreed to let us stay out until midnight for once. The carnival was absolutely packed when we arrived around 8 p.m. Families with little kids were starting to head home, but teenagers and young adults were just getting warmed up. The atmosphere was electric: carnival workers shouting over the noise of spinning rides, kids screaming with delight, and that constant background hum of generators powering everything. We spent the first hour hitting all the rides, trying to win stuffed animals at the game booths, and basically acting like the carefree teenagers we were. Ashley kept insisting we save the haunted house for last because she wanted to work up the courage, while Kevin was already bragging about how nothing scared him. Tyler was somewhere in between, excited but trying to play it cool. The haunted house itself was this massive black structure that took up almost a quarter of the carnival space, with fake fog rolling out from under the entrance and recorded screams echoing from inside. There was a line of about 20 people waiting to go in, and the anticipation was building with each group that disappeared into the darkness. When our turn finally came, the ticket booth guy, this scrawny dude with missing teeth and carnival tats covering his arms, gave us the usual spiel about no touching the actors, stay with your group, and follow the path. He had this raspy voice that made everything sound more ominous than it probably was. The entrance was designed to mess with your head right from the start. You had to walk through this narrow, black-painted corridor where strobe lights would flash randomly, disorienting everyone before you even got to the main part. Ashley grabbed my arm immediately, and I could feel her nails digging into my jacket. The 4 of us formed a tight cluster, with Tyler leading the way because he was the tallest, and Kevin bringing up the rear, constantly making jokes to mask his nervousness. The first few rooms were typical haunted house stuff: fake cobwebs, skeleton props that would spring out at you, recorded wolf howls and creaking door sounds. We jumped and screamed on cue, laughing at ourselves afterward and feeling pretty confident about the whole thing. But as we moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere started to change in ways I can't really explain. The rooms became more elaborate, more realistic, and the scares were more sophisticated. Instead of just jump scares, there were these psychological elements that made you question what was real and what wasn't. In one room, there was this actor dressed as a Victorian-era butler who would follow groups around, never speaking, just watching with these intense eyes that seemed to track your every movement. In another, there was a little girl in a white dress who would whisper nursery rhymes just loud enough for you to hear. But when you turned to look directly at her, she'd disappear into the shadows. The temperature seemed to drop with each room, and the air got thicker, more oppressive. What really got to me was how the actors seemed to study us, like they were picking up on who was most scared, who was trying to act tough, who was genuinely enjoying themselves. It was around the 7th or 8th room that I started to notice something strange about the layout. The path we were following didn't seem to match the outside structure of the building. We'd been walking for what felt like 20 minutes, turning corners and going through doorways that should have led us in circles by now, but somehow we kept ending up in new rooms. Ashley mentioned it first, whispering to me that she was getting confused about which direction we were heading. The rooms were also getting more isolated. We hadn't seen another group of visitors in several minutes, which was weird considering how packed the place had been when we entered. The actors were becoming more aggressive too, not just startling us but actually following us from room to room, their movements more erratic and unpredictable. There was this one guy in a blood-stained apron who kept appearing behind us no matter how fast we walked, and when Tyler tried to joke with him, the actor just stared back without breaking character. The silence was more unnerving than any scream or growl could have been. Then we entered what I can only describe as a hospital room from hell. The walls were covered in fake medical equipment. There were gurneys with body-shaped lumps under sheets, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with something metallic hung in the air. The lighting was dim and flickering, casting strange shadows that made everything look distorted. We were about halfway through when this figure emerged from behind one of the gurneys. A tall man in scrubs with a surgical mask covering most of his face, except for his eyes. His eyes were what caught my attention first. They were too bright, too focused, and they were locked directly on Ashley. Unlike the other actors who had been engaging with all of us, this one seemed to have singled her out from the moment we walked in. He started moving toward our group, but instead of doing the usual scare routine, he walked straight up to Ashley and extended his hand like he wanted her to take it. When she backed away, laughing nervously and assuming it was part of the act, he stepped closer and spoke in this low, calm voice that didn't match the chaotic energy of the rest of the haunted house. "You need to come with me," he said, reaching out again. "There's been an emergency. We need to evacuate this section immediately." His voice was steady, almost professional, but there was something about the way he was looking at Ashley that made my skin crawl. The rest of us exchanged glances, confused because this didn't seem like part of the show. The other actors had been dramatic, over the top, clearly performing. This guy was different. He seemed too normal, too controlled. Ashley stepped back again, bumping into Kevin, and said, "No thanks, we're good." But the man didn't retreat like the other actors had when people declined to participate. Instead, he moved closer, positioning himself between Ashley and the rest of us. "I'm serious," he said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. "There's a problem with the electrical system. I need to get you out through the staff exit." He pointed toward a door I hadn't noticed before. It was painted black like the walls and had a small emergency exit sign that was barely visible in the dim lighting. The whole situation was starting to feel wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Kevin stepped forward and said, "Dude, we're fine. We'll just continue with the regular path." But the man ignored him completely, keeping his attention fixed on Ashley. He reached out and actually grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but with enough firmness that she couldn't easily pull away. "Come on," he said, starting to guide her toward the emergency exit. "Your friends can meet you outside." That's when Ashley's demeanor completely changed. The nervous laughter stopped, and she started pulling against his grip, saying, "Let go of me," in a voice that was getting louder and more panicked. The man's grip tightened, and he started moving more quickly toward the door, saying something about how it would only take a minute. Tyler and Kevin immediately stepped forward, but the man waved them off with his free hand, insisting that only Ashley needed to come with him. The whole scene was happening so fast, but I remember thinking that nothing about this felt like part of the haunted house experience. The other actors had been scary, but playful. This felt genuinely dangerous. Ashley's voice rose to a scream as she tried to wrench her arm free, shouting, "Help me! This isn't part of the show!" The sound cut through all the ambient noise and recorded sound effects like a knife. That's when everything clicked into place for me. This wasn't an actor at all. The way he was moving, the desperation in his attempts to get her toward that door, the complete disregard for the rest of us. This was real. Tyler reacted first, lunging forward and grabbing the man's arm that was holding Ashley. "Let her go, man!" he yelled, and suddenly the three of us were in a physical struggle with this stranger in the middle of a haunted house. The man was stronger than he looked, and for a terrifying moment he seemed like he might actually succeed in dragging Ashley toward the exit. But her screams were getting louder, and I could hear other voices responding from somewhere else in the building. Kevin grabbed a fake medical instrument from one of the props and started hitting the man with it, while I wrapped my arms around Ashley's waist and pulled backward as hard as I could. The man's surgical mask had slipped down during the struggle, and I got a clear look at his face. He was probably in his 30s, with stubble and wild eyes that looked completely unhinged. The sound of running footsteps echoed through the haunted house as what I assumed were real staff members started heading toward us. The man must have heard them too, because he suddenly released Ashley and bolted toward the emergency exit, disappearing through the door before any of us could react. Ashley collapsed against me, sobbing and shaking, while Tyler and Kevin stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Within seconds, 2 actual Carnival workers burst into the room, a woman in a staff t-shirt and a security guard with a flashlight. They took one look at us and immediately started asking questions. What happened? Are you hurt? Did someone bother you? When we explained what had occurred, their expressions grew increasingly serious. The woman got on her radio and started speaking in rapid, urgent tones about locking down the haunted house and searching for an unauthorized person. The security guard escorted us out through the main exit, past confused groups of people who were still waiting in line, completely unaware that anything had gone wrong inside. What happened next was like something out of a crime show. The Carnival management immediately shut down the haunted house and called the police. While we waited for the officers to arrive, the manager, a heavy-set woman named Janet who seemed to know every detail about the operation, started making phone calls and checking schedules. She confirmed what we'd already suspected. There was no employee assigned to that hospital room section at that time of night. In fact, all the actors were accounted for and had been given specific instructions about their roles and boundaries. The emergency exit that the man had tried to use was supposed to be locked from the inside and was only meant for actual emergencies. Janet explained that someone had clearly planned this because the scrubs and surgical mask weren't random items. They were backup costume pieces that were stored in a staff trailer behind the haunted house. Security footage from earlier in the evening showed a man in regular clothes entering through a service entrance around 7 p.m., about an hour before we'd arrived. He'd apparently spent time in the staff areas, helping himself to the costume supplies and learning the layout before positioning himself in that room. The police arrived within 15 minutes and took detailed statements from all of us. The officer explained that this type of incident was more common than people realized. Predators, who would target venues where they could blend in and where people expected to be scared or confused. They searched the entire Carnival grounds, but never found the man. The emergency exit led to a wooded area behind the parking lot, where he could have easily disappeared into the darkness. Ashley had to go to the hospital for a checkup because of the bruising on her wrist, and her parents pressed charges even though they never caught the guy. The whole Carnival packed up and left town the next morning, cutting their planned week-long stay short. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I see news stories about similar incidents. What scares me most isn't the fact that some creep tried to abduct my friend. It's how perfectly he had planned it, how he'd studied the setup and found a way to use people's expectations against them. If Ashley hadn't screamed when she did, if we'd been just a little more trusting of his emergency story, things could have ended very differently. The haunted house was supposed to be fake terror, but we encountered something far more frightening than any actor could have provided. My security job with traveling carnivals across the Midwest brought me to Columbus that August, and what happened there still haunts me. 6 years into this gig after leaving the Army, I'd gotten used to the routine, breaking up drunk teenagers, finding lost kids, keeping the peace between vendors. The pay wasn't much, but it kept me moving, which suited my restless nature perfectly. At 28 and single, I preferred the nomadic lifestyle over being stuck in some office cubicle. That week we'd set up at the Franklin County Fairgrounds, and the atmosphere felt electric with summer energy. Families streamed through the gates, kids clutching cotton candy and dragging their parents toward the rides. The carnival folks seemed upbeat, everyone falling into their familiar rhythms. After 6 years of this, I knew most of the regular vendors by name, understood their quirks, their territorial habits, the unspoken rules that kept everything running smoothly. The Hendersons were probably the sweetest couple in our traveling circus. Harold was this gentle giant with weathered hands that could craft the most intricate wooden toys, while his wife Marge made quilts that looked like they belonged in a museum. They'd been following the Carnival circuit for almost 15 years, always setting up their little booth in the same general area, third row from the main walkway, right between the ring toss and the funnel cake stand. Their trailer was this ancient silver Airstream that they'd converted into a mobile workshop, complete with tiny compartments for all their supplies. Harold would spend hours carving little wooden horses and trains, his thick fingers surprisingly delicate with the detail work. Marge would sit beside him, stitching away at her latest quilt, humming old gospel songs under her breath. They treated everyone like family, always had a thermos of fresh coffee brewing, and would slip the security guards free wooden trinkets when nobody was watching. The trouble started on Tuesday night when I was doing my usual rounds around closing time. The newer vendors, 3 guys in their 20s who joined us just 2 stops back, had set up their booth selling cheap electronics and knockoff designer bags. Their leader was this cocky kid named Brandon with bleached hair and arms covered in tattoos that looked like they'd been done in someone's garage. His buddies, Jake and Tommy, were typical followers who laughed at everything he said and acted tough when he was around. They'd been pushing boundaries since day one, staying open past official hours, blasting music too loud, and taking up more space than they'd paid for. That night, I found them arguing with Harold near the equipment storage area behind the game booths. Brandon was waving his arms around, jabbing his finger at Harold's chest, while the old man just stood there taking it. Even from a distance, I could tell Harold was trying to stay calm, but his jaw was clenched tight. When I got closer, I heard Brandon accusing Harold of stealing some of their extension cords and claiming the Hendersons had been hogging prime booth space that should have gone to younger vendors. The whole confrontation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. Harold kept insisting they hadn't taken anything, pointing out that they'd been in the same spot for years and had never had problems with anyone before. Brandon wasn't buying it, getting more aggressive by the minute, calling Harold a old-timer who needs to learn his place. Marge appeared from their trailer, probably hearing the raised voices, and tried to defuse the situation by offering to help them look for their missing supplies. But Brandon just sneered at her, making some nasty comment about how Grandma should mind her own business. That's when I stepped in, using my most authoritative voice to break things up. I told everyone to head back to their respective areas and deal with any supply issues in the morning through proper channels. Brandon gave me this look like he wanted to say more, but he eventually backed down, muttering something about how this isn't over as he walked away. Harold thanked me quietly, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Marge was clutching his arm, and both of them looked shaken in a way that made my chest tighten with concern. Wednesday morning came with an unusual stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up. I arrived at the fairgrounds around 7 a.m. like always, expecting to find the usual pre-opening bustle of vendors setting up their displays and testing their equipment. Instead, I found chaos. The Hendersons' booth space was completely empty, not just closed but stripped bare like they'd never been there at all. Their wooden display cases were gone. The hand-painted signs Marge had made were missing. Even the little wind chimes Harold had hung from the booth's corner were nowhere to be found. What really got to me was the deliberate nature of it all. Their electrical hookups had been disconnected and coiled neatly on the ground. Their water spigot was turned off, and someone had even swept the area clean of sawdust and fabric scraps. It was like they'd been erased from existence. The other vendors were standing around in small groups, whispering to each other and glancing nervously at the empty space. When I asked around, nobody seemed to know where the Hendersons had gone, but their body language told a different story. The Carnival manager, a gruff man named Pete who'd been running shows for 30 years, claimed the Hendersons had decided to take a break and left during the night. But Pete wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it, kept fidgeting with his clipboard and changing the subject whenever I pressed for details. The other longtime vendors, people who'd known Harold and Marge for years, suddenly became very interested in their merchandise displays whenever I approached. There was this heavy atmosphere of fear hanging over everyone, like they were all waiting for something terrible to happen. Around noon, I decided to drive over to the KOA campground where most of the Carnival folks parked their trailers and RVs. The Henderson's silver Airstream wasn't in its usual spot, but the ground showed clear tire tracks in the gravel, and there were some scattered wood shavings that looked fresh. A camp host mentioned seeing their trailer being towed out around 4 a.m. by a dark pickup truck, but couldn't give me any more details. The whole thing felt wrong, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't want to fit together. Thursday morning brought the kind of news that makes your world tilt sideways. I was grabbing coffee at a gas station about 15 miles outside Columbus when I overheard two truckers talking about a trailer fire that had happened overnight. One of them mentioned seeing a burned-out Airstream in the parking lot of a Shell station on Route 33, and my heart started hammering against my ribs. I abandoned my coffee and drove straight there, hoping against hope that it wasn't what I thought it was. But as soon as I pulled into that parking lot, I knew. The twisted metal skeleton that remained was definitely the Hendersons' trailer. I could tell from the distinctive curved windows and the little decorative awning that had somehow survived the flames. The local fire department was still on scene, and a detective was taking photos of the wreckage. What made my knees weak was seeing the crime scene tape wrapped around the area, and paramedics loading what looked like a stretcher into an ambulance. The smell of burned plastic and something else, something organic and terrible, hung in the air like a curse. The detective, a tired-looking woman named Officer Martinez, was surprisingly willing to talk once I explained my connection to the victims. She told me they'd found evidence of accelerant use, meaning someone had deliberately set the fire. But what really made my spine turn to ice was when she mentioned they'd discovered blood spatter patterns inside the trailer that suggested violence had occurred before the fire started. The blood was concentrated near what would have been the sleeping area, and there were signs of a struggle: overturned furniture, broken glass, defensive wounds on the victims. Martinez said they were treating it as a double homicide, and that the bodies had been so badly burned that identification would take days. She asked me about any recent conflicts or threats the Hendersons might have faced, and I told her everything about the argument with Brandon and his crew. Her expression grew darker with each detail I shared, and she scribbled notes furiously in her little pad. When I finished, she looked up at me with the kind of expression cops get when they know they're dealing with something bigger than a simple crime. When I got back to the fairgrounds that evening, the atmosphere had shifted into something almost supernatural. The other vendors moved around like ghosts, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Brandon and his crew were still there, running their booth like nothing had happened, but there was something different about them now. They carried themselves with a swagger that hadn't been there before, like they'd won some kind of invisible contest. Brandon caught me watching him and flashed this cold, calculating smile that made my skin crawl. He mouthed, "Accidents happen," across the crowd, then turned back to his customer like we were just having a friendly conversation. The other Carnival workers seemed to be giving his booth a wide berth, and I noticed several of the longtime vendors packing up their displays earlier than usual. When I tried to talk to some of them about what they might know, they'd suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been friends with Marge for over a decade, actually started crying when I mentioned the Hendersons' names, but she wouldn't say a word about what might have happened. The next morning, Officer Martinez called me with an update that made my blood run cold. She'd driven out to the fairgrounds to question Brandon and his associates, but they were gone, completely vanished, along with their merchandise, their booth setup, even their vehicle registrations from the Carnival's records. Pete claimed they'd decided to move on to the next town, but couldn't provide any forwarding information or contact details. What really disturbed Martinez was that other Carnival workers seemed genuinely terrified to talk about the missing vendors. Several people had mentioned something about asking too many questions and what happens to people who don't mind their own business. One older vendor had pulled Martinez aside and whispered that the Carnival had its own way of dealing with problems, and that people who caused trouble had a tendency to disappear. When she pressed for specifics, the man clammed up completely and refused to say another word. Martinez told me she'd never seen anything like it. An entire community of people who were clearly afraid of something, but too scared to name what that something was. The carnival packed up and moved to the next town 2 days later, right on schedule. Like Harold and Marge Henderson had never existed at all. But I couldn't let it go. Against every instinct screaming at me to drop it, I started digging deeper into the carnival's history and discovered a pattern that made my hands tremble as I read through old police reports. Over the past 5 years, there had been at least 8 accidents or disappearances involving carnival workers who'd had conflicts with newer vendors or challenged the established order. A cotton candy vendor in Indiana who'd complained about protection money had died in a gas leak explosion. A game operator in Michigan who'd threatened to report safety violations had simply vanished one night, leaving behind only his jacket and a suicide note that handwriting experts later called questionable. Each incident had been investigated, but witnesses always seemed to develop selective amnesia, and evidence had a way of disappearing or being compromised. The more I researched, the more I realized that what I'd witnessed wasn't just a random act of violence. It was part of a systematic campaign of intimidation designed to keep carnival workers in line. The investigation into the Hendersons' murder eventually went cold, officially classified as an unsolved homicide with no viable suspects. Officer Martinez was transferred to another precinct shortly after, and the new detective assigned to the case seemed more interested in closing it than solving it. I quit the carnival circuit 3 weeks later, unable to stomach the sight of those empty-eyed vendors who knew exactly what had happened but would never speak up. The nightmares started around that time. Dreams where I could hear Marge's voice calling for help while flames consumed everything around her. I tried to contact other former carnival workers, hoping someone would finally break their silence, but most of them had disappeared into new lives or simply refused to talk. The few who did respond gave me the same chilling advice. Some questions are better left unasked, and some truths are too dangerous to know. I moved back to my hometown, got a job at a local factory, and tried to forget everything I'd learned about the dark underbelly of America's traveling entertainment industry. But every time I see a carnival setting up in a parking lot, I think about Harold and Marge, and I wonder how many other people have discovered that asking too many questions can be a death sentence. Three years have passed since that night in Baton Springs, Louisiana, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened. I was 18 then, fresh out of high school in a town so small that the arrival of a traveling carnival was the biggest event we'd had all year. The whole place buzzed with excitement for weeks before they even set up their rusty rides and faded game booths in the empty lot behind Miller's hardware store. I worked part-time at the local diner, saving up for college while trying to figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life. Most nights after my shift, I'd hang out with my 2 best friends, Connor and Ethan, driving around in Connor's beat-up Ford pickup, complaining about how boring our lives were. We'd been tight since 7th grade, the kind of friendship where you don't even need to talk sometimes. Just cruising down those dark country roads with the radio playing was enough. Connor was the talker of our group, this tall, freckled guy who could charm his way out of detention or convince a teacher to give him an extension on any paper. He had this easy smile and a way of making even the most mundane stories sound hilarious. Ethan, on the other hand, was our resident adrenaline junkie, shorter than Connor but built like he spent every free moment at the gym, which he basically did. The guy was obsessed with extreme sports, always showing us videos of people base jumping or free climbing, talking about all the crazy stuff he wanted to try someday. He had this intense way of staring at you when he got excited about something, like he was trying to transfer his enthusiasm directly into your brain. While Connor and I were content to talk about adventure, Ethan actually sought it out, which is probably why that Wednesday night in July felt like destiny to him when we drove past the carnival after closing time. The carnival had been in town for about a week, and we'd all gone during regular hours a few days earlier. It was your typical small-town traveling show, a handful of rides that had seen better decades, game booths with prizes that probably cost 50 cents to make, and the smell of fried everything mixing with diesel fuel and cigarette smoke. The Ferris wheel was the centerpiece, this ancient contraption that groaned and swayed in a way that made me question the safety inspections. But Ethan had been obsessed with it since the moment he saw it, not because it was particularly thrilling, but because he'd overheard one of the carnival workers talking about how the view from the top let you see clear across 3 counties. He kept saying he wanted to ride it at night when all the lights were on, when the whole thing would feel more magical. Connor and I had laughed it off, but Ethan had this look in his eyes that I'd learned to recognize over the years. The same look he got before he convinced us to sneak into the abandoned grain elevator, or when he decided we should try cliff jumping at the quarry. That night we'd been driving aimlessly for about an hour after my shift ended, windows down, music playing softly, when we passed the carnival grounds. The place was completely dark except for a few security lights scattered around the perimeter, casting long shadows between the silent rides. Most of the carnival workers lived in trailers parked behind the main area, but even those looked quiet and settled for the night. Ethan suddenly sat up straighter in the passenger seat, that familiar excitement creeping into his voice as he pointed toward the Ferris wheel's dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. "Guys, this is perfect," he said, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "The place is empty, no crowds, no screaming kids. We could actually enjoy the rides without all the chaos." Connor slowed the truck as we passed the entrance, a gap in the chain-link fence that was secured with nothing more than a padlock and chain that looked like it had been there since the 1990s. "Are you insane?" I said from the back seat, but I was already leaning forward, caught up in the possibility despite myself. "We can't just break into a carnival. That's like actual crime stuff." But Ethan was already pulling out his phone's flashlight, examining the fence line as Connor made a U-turn and parked about 50 yards away from the entrance. "Come on, man," Ethan said, turning to face both of us with that grin that meant he'd already made up his mind. "When are we ever going to get another chance like this? In a few months we'll all be scattered across different colleges, working boring jobs, being responsible adults. This is our last summer to do something actually memorable." He gestured toward the carnival with genuine enthusiasm, like he was presenting us with the opportunity of a lifetime. The weird thing was, he kind of had a point. We'd spent so many nights complaining about having nothing to do, and here was an entire amusement park just sitting there, waiting for us. Connor was already drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, which meant he was considering it seriously. "The fence isn't even that high," Ethan continued, studying the perimeter in the dim light. "And there's no security guard, no cameras that I can see, just some old rides and that beautiful Ferris wheel calling our names." He had this way of making everything sound reasonable when he explained it, like sneaking into a closed carnival was just a logical next step in our evening plans. Connor finally spoke up, his voice carrying that mixture of excitement and nervousness that came with all our best bad decisions. "If we're gonna do this, we do it quick and quiet. Get in, ride the Ferris wheel, maybe check out 1 or 2 other rides, then get out before anyone notices." I wanted to be the voice of reason, to remind them that trespassing charges probably wouldn't look great on college applications, but honestly, the adrenaline was already starting to build in my chest. The 3 of us had always been good at talking ourselves into minor trouble, but this felt different somehow, bigger and more real than our usual teenage mischief. We parked the truck behind a cluster of pine trees about a quarter-mile down the road, far enough away that no one would connect it to us if they happened to drive by. The walk back to the carnival felt like it took forever, our footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder while we went over the plan one more time. Ethan had appointed himself the leader of this expedition, naturally, and he'd already figured out the best spot to climb the fence, a section where the chain link was slightly bent, and there was a concrete drainage pipe we could use as a step. The night air was thick with humidity, and the sound of cicadas, typical for July in Louisiana. But there was something else in the atmosphere that made the hair on my arms stand up. Maybe it was just the thrill of doing something we shouldn't be doing, or maybe it was the way the carnival looked so different in the darkness like a sleeping giant that might wake up at any moment. Connor kept making jokes to cut the tension, but even his usual confidence seemed a little forced as we approached the fence. Getting inside turned out to be easier than we'd expected. The fence was about 7 feet high, but with Ethan boosting Connor and then me helping pull Ethan up after us, we were over in less than 2 minutes. The carnival grounds felt enormous in the darkness, much bigger than they'd seemed during the day when they were full of people and noise. Our phone flashlights created these weird dancing shadows between the rides, and everything looked somehow more sinister without the bright carnival lights and cheerful music. The tilt-a-whirl sat there like a giant spider, its cars hanging at odd angles. The funhouse mirrors reflected our lights back at us in distorted flashes that made us all jump at least once. But the Ferris wheel dominated everything, this massive circle of metal and cables that seemed to reach all the way to the stars. Ethan was practically vibrating with excitement as we made our way toward it, stepping carefully around extension cords and avoiding the game booths that were covered with plastic tarps for the night. "This is it, guys," Ethan whispered as we reached the base of the Ferris wheel, his voice full of genuine awe. The control booth was just a simple wooden box with a few switches and levers, the kind of setup that probably hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Connor examined it with his flashlight while I kept watch for any signs of life from the trailer park behind us. "I think I can figure this out," Connor said, which honestly didn't surprise me. He'd always been good with mechanical stuff, the kind of guy who could hotwire a lawnmower or fix a broken radio with nothing but a screwdriver and determination. The switch panel was surprisingly simple, just a main power lever and a few buttons labeled with faded tape. When Connor flipped the main switch, the Ferris wheel came to life with a low humming sound that made all three of us take a step back. The lights didn't come on, which was probably for the best since we were trying to stay invisible. But the wheel began to turn slowly, the gondolas swaying gently as they moved through their ancient rotation. We climbed into one of the gondolas at the bottom, and I have to admit, the thrill was incredible. Rising up above the carnival grounds, above the trees, above everything familiar, gave us this perspective on our little town that I'd never experienced before. The lights of Baton Springs spread out below us like a circuit board, and in the distance, we could see the highway cutting through the darkness with the occasional headlight moving along it. Ethan had been right about the view. You really could see for miles in every direction, and there was something magical about being up there in the silence, just the three of us suspended between earth and sky. Connor was taking pictures with his phone, trying to capture the moment, while Ethan just sat there with this satisfied grin, like he'd accomplished something important. We stayed up there for maybe 20 minutes, going around 3 or 4 times, talking quietly about our plans for college and wondering if we'd ever do anything this spontaneous again. For a while, it felt like the perfect end to our high school years, this one last adventure before we all went our separate ways. That's when Ethan got the idea to check out the funhouse. As we climbed down from the Ferris wheel, he kept talking about how different everything would look inside without all the usual screaming kids and flashing lights. "Just imagine," he said, "having the whole place to ourselves, really being able to appreciate the craftsmanship of those old carnival scares." Connor and I exchanged glances. We both knew that tone in Ethan's voice, the same one he'd used before convincing us to explore the abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The funhouse was this weathered wooden structure painted in faded reds and yellows, with a clown face over the entrance that had probably been terrifying even when it was new. The door was unlocked, just hanging slightly open like it was inviting us inside. Connor went first, his phone light cutting through the darkness and revealing mirrors that seemed to stretch on forever, creating an endless tunnel of reflections. I followed, and Ethan came behind us, already talking about how much cooler this was than the daytime experience. We made it maybe halfway through the funhouse when we heard the sound. It started as this low mechanical grinding, like gears that needed oil, but it was coming from deeper inside the structure, from parts we hadn't explored yet. Connor stopped dead in his tracks, and we all listened. The sound came again, followed by what I swear was a voice, Not words exactly, but like someone calling out from far away. "That's probably just the building settling," Connor said, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. Ethan, however, was already moving toward the sound, his flashlight beam dancing across the warped mirrors as he headed deeper into the funhouse. "Come on," he called back to us. "It's probably just some automated scare that's still running." I wanted to leave right then, every instinct telling me we'd pushed our luck far enough for one night, but I couldn't just abandon my friend. Connor and I followed Ethan's light as he rounded a corner and disappeared into what looked like a dead end, filled with distorted mirrors and hanging plastic chains. When we reached the spot where Ethan had been just seconds before, he was gone. Not hiding, not crouched behind something, completely gone. The mirrors showed our confused faces from a dozen angles, but no third person, no sign that anyone else had been there at all. Connor called out his name, first in a normal voice, then louder, then almost shouting, but the only response was our own echoes bouncing back from the maze of reflections. We spent what felt like hours searching every corner of that funhouse, checking behind every mirror, every fake wall, every possible hiding spot. The grinding sound had stopped, and the silence was somehow worse than the noise had been. Our phone batteries were dying, and the weak light made everything look even more nightmarish than before. We called Ethan's phone over and over, but it went straight to voicemail each time. Connor was starting to panic, talking about calling the police, but I kept thinking about how we'd have to explain why we were there in the first place. The sun was starting to rise by the time we gave up searching and climbed back over the fence. We drove around town for the rest of the morning, checking all of Ethan's usual spots, the gym, the coffee shop, even his ex-girlfriend's house. But nobody had seen him. When we finally worked up the courage to call the police, they took our story seriously at first, but their attitudes changed when we admitted we'd been trespassing. The carnival workers claimed they'd been asleep all night, said they'd never seen any of us, and insisted their funhouse had been locked up tight since closing time. The police searched the entire carnival twice, even brought in dogs, but found nothing. 3 days later, they discovered Ethan's phone wedged under the seat of the carousel, a ride we'd never even gone near. The screen was cracked, the battery dead, but when they managed to charge it, the last text message was one he'd sent to his mom at 9:47 p.m., more than 2 hours before we'd even entered the carnival grounds. The traveling show packed up and left that same afternoon, just like they'd planned, and nobody ever saw Ethan again. The smell of fried dough and diesel fuel still makes me nauseous, even 3 years later. I was working security for Brightwood Carnival when it happened, one of those traveling shows that sets up in mall parking lots for a week before moving on. Thursday afternoon, around 4 p.m., we were doing final prep before opening night. I'd been with the company for 6 years, knew every ride operator, every game booth worker, even recognized most of the regular families who followed us from town to town. That day started like any other setup day, with me walking the perimeter, checking that the fence panels were secure and making sure local kids weren't trying to sneak in for free rides. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, maybe 75 degrees, with just enough breeze to carry the sound of the carousel music we were testing. I first noticed the two girls around 3:30 p.m. when I was checking the back lot where we keep the supply trailers. They looked about 16 or 17, both wearing those oversized hoodies kids wear even when it's warm out. The blonde one had her phone out, doing that thing where they film themselves walking and talking. The other girl, with dark curly hair pulled into a messy bun, kept laughing and pushing her friend playfully. They were staying just outside our fence line, so technically they weren't trespassing. I watched them for a minute, making sure they weren't planning anything stupid, then continued my rounds. 20 minutes later, when I circled back, they were gone. I figured they'd gotten bored and left. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to which direction they'd headed. Around 5 p.m., my walkie crackled with static. It was Rodney from the front gate asking if I could check Trailer 7, said he thought he heard banging coming from inside when he walked past. Trailer 7 was our main storage unit, a 40-footer we used for extra decorations, backup prizes, and seasonal props. The thing was ancient, probably from the early 90s, with rust eating through the corners and a door that needed a good shoulder shove to open properly. As I headed over there, I noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in the dirt leading around the back of the trailer where we never really had reason to go. 2 sets of prints, both small, like from sneakers. The chain on the door was hanging loose, which wasn't right. I'd personally checked all the storage units that morning and everything had been locked up tight. The banging had stopped by the time I reached the trailer. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds just listening. Nothing but the distant sound of the Ferris wheel being tested and some crows arguing in the trees nearby. I pulled the door open. It groaned like it always did, and peered inside. The trailer was packed with the usual junk. Boxes of stuffed animals, rolled up canvas signs, those giant fiberglass clown heads we use for the funhouse. Everything looked normal at first glance, but there was this smell, something sharp and chemical, like fresh paint mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. And the air felt wrong, too still, like when you walk into a room where people just stop talking. I called out, asking if anyone was in there. No response. I should have gone in right then to check properly, but Frank was yelling over the walkie about needing help with a hydraulic leak on the tilt-a-whirl. I locked the trailer back up and headed to help Frank, but that uneasy feeling stayed with me. Around 6:30, just as we were about to open the gates to the public, I heard it, my phone ringing with a 911 transfer. That's when everything went sideways. The dispatcher's voice was all business, saying they'd received a call from 2 teenage girls claiming to be trapped inside a trailer at our location. The girl who called was whispering, barely audible, saying someone was outside, dragging something metal along the trailer walls. The dispatcher said the call had cut off abruptly, but they'd traced it to our coordinates. My chest got tight. I immediately thought of those 2 girls I'd seen earlier, the footprints by Trailer 7. I told the dispatcher I was heading there now and sprinted across the lot, my keys jangling against my hip with every step. This time I didn't hesitate. I yanked the chain off and threw the door open wide, yelling that security was here, that everything was going to be okay. The late afternoon sun cut through the darkness inside, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. I stepped inside, pushing past the first row of boxes, calling out for the girls. The trailer seemed bigger than usual, like it stretched on forever into the shadows. I found the first sign something was really wrong about halfway in, a purple phone case decorated with holographic stickers, lying on the floor between 2 stacks of prize boxes. Next to it, fresh scratches in the dirty floor, like someone had been dragged, or like they'd been trying to claw their way toward the door. The chemical smell was stronger here, mixed with something else now. Perfume, the fruity kind teenagers wear. But the girls were nowhere. Just that phone case, and those scratches and a single white sneaker wedged behind a crate of carousel horses. The police arrived within minutes, 3 patrol cars and an unmarked detective's vehicle. They cleared everyone out of the back lot and started processing the scene. I gave my statement maybe 4 or 5 times, each officer asking the same questions in slightly different ways. Did I see anyone else near the trailer? Had any employees reported anything unusual? Were all our workers accounted for? The detective, a woman named Garrett with tired eyes and coffee stains on her blazer, had me walk her through everything while a forensics team combed through the trailer. They found the second phone wedged deep between 2 boxes near the back wall, the screen cracked but still functioning. The last outgoing call was to 911 at 6:27 p.m. They also found long scratches on the inside of the door, fresh ones that hadn't been there that morning. What they didn't find was any sign of how 2 teenage girls could have vanished from a locked trailer in broad daylight. The Carnival shut down that night, obviously. We spent hours checking every single trailer, every ride compartment, every possible hiding space. The police brought in dogs, and they went crazy near Trailer 7, but lost the scent about 50 feet away, right where the asphalt of the parking lot began. By midnight, there were news vans in the lot, and worried parents screaming at the police to find their daughters. Turns out the girls were Mackenzie Reeves and Jordan Castellanos, both juniors at Westfield High. Good kids, according to everyone. Mackenzie was on the volleyball team. Jordan played violin in the school orchestra. They'd told their parents they were going to the mall, but had decided to check out the carnival setup instead. Their social media showed they'd been posting videos all afternoon, tagging the location, filming themselves doing dances with the Ferris wheel in the background. The last post was at 4:47 p.m., a 10-second clip of them approaching the back fence, with Mackenzie saying they'd found a cool spot for photos. Here's what really messes with my head, even now. When the forensics team processed that phone they found wedged between the boxes, they discovered something that made everyone go quiet. In the phone's video gallery was a 3-minute recording, time-stamped at 6:21 p.m. The video was mostly black. They were obviously inside the trailer with no light, but the audio was clear. You could hear both girls breathing heavily, whispering to each other about staying quiet. Then, at the 1:47 mark, there's this sound. Metal scraping against metal, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging a crowbar or a pipe along the outside of the trailer. The girls go completely silent. The dragging sound stops right where the door would be. You can hear the chain rattle slightly. Then Mackenzie's voice, barely a whisper. "Jordan, there's someone under the floor." The video cuts to static after that. But here's the thing. Trailer 7 doesn't have a floor hatch. We checked. The police checked. They even brought in ground-penetrating radar. Solid concrete pad underneath, no basement, no access tunnels, nothing. The search expanded over the next 3 days. They brought in state police, FBI, even volunteer search teams from neighboring counties. Every employee was questioned, polygraphed, had their background scrutinized. Norman, one of our game operators, got hauled in twice because he'd had a minor drug conviction 10 years ago. But his alibi was solid. He'd been live streaming himself playing video games from his apartment all afternoon. They dredged the retention pond behind the mall, searched every abandoned building within 5 miles, checked every registered sex offender in the state. Nothing. It was like those girls had evaporated into thin air. The media had a field day with it. The vanishing at Brightwood Carnival, they called it. Theories ranged from human trafficking to cult kidnappings to some serial killer targeting teenagers. But none of it made sense. How do you make 2 people disappear from a locked trailer in the middle of a busy carnival setup, with dozens of workers around, in broad daylight? On the 4th day, something happened that made me quit the carnival business for good. I'd gone back to the lot to collect my personal belongings from the office. The police had finally cleared it as no longer an active crime scene. It was early morning, maybe 6 a.m., and fog was rolling in from the fields nearby. As I walked past Trailer 7, I heard it again. That same metallic dragging sound from the video. My whole body went rigid. The sound was coming from inside the trailer this time, not outside. I could see the police tape across the door, still intact. But that sound kept going, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor in there. I called 911 immediately, backing away from the trailer while keeping my eyes locked on that door. The sound stopped the moment I started talking to the dispatcher. When the police arrived and cut through their own tape to check inside, the trailer was exactly as they'd left it. Except for one thing. On the floor, in the dust, were 2 sets of fresh footprints leading from the door to the back wall. Teenage-sized footprints, but they only went one way. The case remains unsolved. Mackenzie Reeves and Jordan Castellanos are still listed as missing persons. Their families still hold vigils every year. The Brightwood Carnival retired Trailer 7. They said it was too old anyway, but I know the real reason. I work mall security now, steady hours, decent benefits, and no mysterious disappearances. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm doing my rounds, I think about that chemical smell, those scratches on the floor, and Mackenzie's terrified whisper about someone being under the floor. The FBI's final report suggested the girls had run away, possibly meeting someone online who helped them disappear. But they never explained the video, the sounds, or how 2 teenagers could vanish from a locked trailer without leaving any trace of where they went. I know what I heard that morning. Those girls didn't run away, something took them. And sometimes when it's very quiet, I wonder if they're still trying to find their way back, leaving footprints in places they shouldn't be able to reach, trapped somewhere between here and wherever that trailer really leads. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night in September 2004. I'd just finished my patrol shift and was pulling into my driveway when dispatch crackled through about a missing teenager. Melissa Thornton, 15 years old, hadn't come home from the county fair. Her mother was frantic, said Melissa promised to be back by 9. I remember sighing, thinking it was probably just another kid pushing curfew, maybe sneaking off with some boy. God, how wrong I was. I turned my cruiser around and headed back to the station, the radio chatter already picking up as more units got involved. Melissa was a good kid, straight-A student at Ridgemont High, played clarinet in the band. Her best friend Caitlin told us they'd gone to the fair together around 6 that evening with a group from school. They'd ridden the Ferris wheel, played some ring toss, shared a funnel cake, normal teenage stuff. But around 8:30, Caitlin said Melissa wanted to ride the Gravitron one more time before they left. Caitlin had already thrown up once from the spinning and decided to wait by the ticket booth. She watched Melissa hand her ticket to the operator, a guy with bleached tips in his hair and a faded Metallica shirt. That was the last time anyone saw her. The Gravitron operator's name was Ricky Sawyer, according to the Carnival's employment records. 28 years old, been with Lone Star Amusements for about 6 months. When we went to question him the next morning, his trailer was empty. Bed still made, clothes gone, truck gone. The Carnival manager, a weathered old guy named Earl, said Ricky had worked the late shift, closing down the Gravitron around 11. Nobody saw him after that. Earl tried calling Ricky's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. The timing was too convenient to ignore. Girl goes missing from his ride and he vanishes the same night. We searched everywhere, the fairgrounds, the surrounding fields, even dragged the pond behind the old drive-in theater. 3 days later, a couple kids riding bikes found Melissa's purse in the drainage ditch that ran along the back of the Carnival lot. Her wallet was still inside, along with her house keys and the friendship bracelet Caitlin had made her. But there was something else in there too. A folded piece of paper with a phone number written in pencil. When we ran the number, it belonged to a disconnected line from a motel 2 towns over. The motel had been closed for years. The sheriff decided to bring in the state police, but they didn't find much more than we did. Ricky Sawyer had no criminal record, no family that we could locate. His employment application with the Carnival was mostly fake. Wrong social security number, previous addresses that didn't exist. The FBI even got involved briefly, ran his prints through their database. Nothing. The guy was a ghost. After 2 months with no leads, no sightings, no body, the case went cold. The official report labeled Melissa as a runaway, despite her mother's protests. Mrs. Thornton called the station every week for updates, and every week I had to tell her we had nothing new. The Carnival came back the next year, and the year after that. Different operators for the rides. Earl had retired and some younger guy took over. People still went, still ate cotton candy and screamed on the roller coaster, but there was always this shadow hanging over it. Parents kept their kids closer, made them check in every hour. The Gravitron was still there, painted fresh with new LED lights, but I noticed fewer people rode it. Sometimes I'd drive by during my patrol and see it spinning, all lit up against the night sky. And I'd think about Melissa stepping through that metal door and never coming back out. Then it happened again. September 2007, 3 years almost to the day after Melissa disappeared. Another 15-year-old girl, Brittany Hawkins. Same story. Went to the fair with friends. Wanted one last ride on the Gravitron before heading home. Her friend waited outside, saw her go in. When the ride stopped and everyone stumbled out dizzy and laughing, Brittany wasn't with them. The operator, a woman this time with a sleeve of Carnival-themed tattoos, said she never got on. but Brittany's friends swore she watched her climb inside. They argued about it while precious minutes ticked by, and by the time someone thought to actually search the ride, check behind the panels, under the platform, Brittany was long gone. This time I didn't wait for backup. I raced to the fairgrounds with my siren blaring, skidded to a stop right in front of the Gravitron. The operator was still there, chain-smoking cigarettes and insisting she'd never seen the girl. But something about her story didn't sit right. She kept mentioning that she'd just started working there 2 weeks ago, kept saying how she didn't know anything about the ride's history. When I pressed her about whether anyone had trained her, shown her around the mechanical areas, she got nervous, said some guy had given her a quick rundown her first day but she couldn't remember his name, said he had bleached tips in his hair. My heart nearly stopped. I called for every available unit, had them lock down the fairgrounds. Nobody in or out. We searched every ride, every game booth, every trailer. The new Carnival manager was cooperative but confused. He'd never hired anyone matching Ricky's description. We tore the Gravitron apart, literally. Had the fire department bring in cutting tools, removed every panel, checked every inch of the machinery. That's when we found it. Behind the main control panel, there was a space about 3 feet wide that ran along the back wall of the ride. It wasn't supposed to be there according to the manufacturer's blueprints. Someone had modified the ride, created a hidden compartment. Inside, we found strands of long blonde hair caught on a rough metal edge. They matched Brittany's. The space led to a maintenance hatch that opened underneath the ride's platform. From there, someone could crawl through the support structure to the back of the fairgrounds, completely unseen. We followed the path and it came out near the drainage ditch where Melissa's purse had been found. But Brittany wasn't there. What we did find was a Carnival worker's uniform stuffed behind some equipment boxes. It had a Lone Star Amusements logo from 2004, the company that ran the fair when Melissa disappeared. Security footage from the nearest businesses showed a figure in dark clothes walking away from the fairgrounds around the time Brittany vanished, but the quality was too poor to make out any details. We kept the fair closed for 3 days, brought in search dogs, checked every storm drain and abandoned building within 5 miles. The FBI took over, said it was clearly the same perpetrator. They analyzed the hidden compartment, found DNA from multiple sources. Some of it matched Melissa, confirming what we'd feared all along. There were other samples too, older ones that didn't match anyone in the system. The investigation revealed that the Gravitron had been sold between several Carnival companies over the years. Impossible to track all its previous locations. Each time it moved, the hidden compartment went with it, and God knows how many girls had been taken through that secret hatch over the years. Then we got the break we needed. A gas station attendant in Arkansas called in a tip, said a man matching Ricky's description had been coming in regularly, always paid cash, always nervous. State police set up surveillance and spotted him leaving a rundown trailer park. When they moved in to arrest him, he tried to run. They found Brittany in a locked storm cellar behind his trailer, dehydrated and terrified but alive. She'd been there for 5 days. Ricky, whose real name turned out to be Richard Jankowski, had been following the Carnival circuit for over a decade, sometimes working for them, sometimes just showing up when they came to town. He knew which rides had been modified, knew when to strike. He confessed to taking Melissa and 4 other girls across 3 states. Only Brittany survived. They found remains buried in various locations he'd marked on a map he kept. Melissa was buried in a field outside Texarkana. Her mother finally got to bring her daughter home. The town carnival that year was a little sad, if I'm being honest. Most of the booths were thrown together with plywood and cheap vinyl signs, and the rides creaked loud enough to hear from the parking lot. But for people like me and Claire, who didn't have much else going on, it was something. She had picked up a few evening shifts running the bottle toss booth, right near the edge of the lot, next to the cotton candy trailer that always smelled burnt. That Saturday night, I went over to help her close up. We were both seniors in high school, bored and looking for anything that felt like a break from routine. It was one of those nights where everything felt a little unreal, not in a magical way, more like we were moving through a set someone had forgotten to take down. The music had stopped, the lights were dimmed, and most of the workers had packed up or were hanging around the food trucks out back. Claire still had to pack the leftover prizes and pull down the tarp, so I offered to stick around. We laughed a lot while cleaning. She kept tossing rubber ducks at me like they were dodgeballs, and I kept trying to stack the oversized plush frogs in a pyramid. Dumb stuff, but it felt like our own private version of the fair. After we finished, we wandered a bit. There was this weird mirror tent a few booths over, all shut down with a thin chain looped around the entrance poles. Claire said she'd never actually gone in while it was open. The flap wasn't locked, so I pulled it back, and we stepped inside. It was almost pitch dark except for one emergency bulb flickering in the ceiling. The mirrors were warped in strange ways. Some stretched us tall, others compressed our faces. We stayed maybe 5 minutes, just long enough to take a few silly pictures with Claire's phone, and then leave because the air inside felt too warm and stale. On our way back to the booth to grab her backpack, we took a few more pictures. Goofy poses near the prize shelves, Claire sitting on the booth counter pretending to sell me an invisible soda. I didn't notice it at the time, but there was this tight silence settling over everything. No bugs chirping, no distant chatter, just the hollow echo of our own footsteps on gravel. We joked about being the last 2 people alive in the world, and Claire kept making dramatic zombie noises behind me while I tried to take a panoramic shot of the dark fairgrounds. We didn't feel scared. Not then. The next morning, we were at her place, scrolling through the photos while eating cereal straight from the box. We laughed at most of them, Claire making duck lips in front of the mirror tent, me holding a plastic sword like some dollar store knight. But then we hit one that made her pause. It was a blurry shot of me near the shelf of plush bears, and over my left shoulder, tucked between the edge of the booth and the cotton candy trailer, there was someone. At first, we thought it was just a shadow, but when we zoomed in, we saw a face. White paint smudged across the mouth, eyes ringed in dark circles. It looked like clown makeup, only not the kind made for kids' parties. More like it had been rubbed half off with a dirty towel. We scrolled to the next picture. He was closer, still half hidden, but unmistakably the same man. We hadn't seen him. Neither of us remembered anyone near us that late. And yet there he was, showing up in 3 more photos, always moving in, just enough to be noticed if you knew where to look. By the last photo, he was standing near the mirror tent entrance, angled like he was watching us from the shadows. His posture wasn't aggressive. If anything, it was too still, too deliberate, like someone trying not to be seen but wanting to be caught on camera. Claire got real quiet. She locked her phone and sat back, like she didn't want to hold it anymore. I tried to play it down, said maybe it was a leftover prop from one of the haunted booths, or a carny trying to mess with people. But deep down, I was unsettled. The man wasn't smiling or waving, just lingering. And that smeared makeup, it looked sloppy, not staged. Like he'd been wearing it all day. We decided to go back to the carnival grounds and talk to someone, just in case it wasn't a prank. The guy at the front gate, some older security guard named Carl, listened while we showed him the pictures. His face changed after the second one. He told us to wait and walked into the trailer near the entrance. A few minutes later, he came back with another guy in a windbreaker and a badge clipped to his belt. They brought us inside and pulled up the camera feeds from the night before. The system had grainy angles, mostly from the corners of the lot, but it didn't take long. Around 9:30 p.m., the cameras caught the same man crouching behind the game booths, slipping between the prize trailers and waiting. What chilled me was that he never seemed to move unless no one was watching. He just waited. They showed us nearly 30 minutes of him moving in and out of frame. Never running. Always just stepping into some dark corner, staying low, like he knew exactly where the cameras couldn't reach. He circled the booths we were at, stayed near the mirror tent longer than anywhere else. At one point, he stood just outside the flap while we were inside, barely a foot away. That was the part that stuck with me the most. How close he was without us ever knowing. I kept thinking about the silence we'd joked about, how it had felt hollow, like the night was holding its breath. Turns out maybe it was. Claire couldn't stop pacing after we left the trailer. She kept checking behind us like she expected him to appear in broad daylight. The police came later that afternoon, took statements, and got copies of the footage. They said they'd patrol the grounds and check with other staff, but no one had seen him before or since. No missing persons reports matched his face, and no one working that night recognized him, not even among the drifters who sometimes joined the setup crew. They treated it seriously, but after a week passed with nothing, the urgency just faded. Claire deleted the photos eventually, said she didn't want that face sitting in her gallery. I kept one though, not for some dramatic reason. It's just that something about the way he was looking, or rather, not looking, stuck with me. He wasn't staring at us. His head was always turned slightly, like he was watching something else just out of frame. And I guess that's what's bothered me the most. The idea that maybe he wasn't hiding from us. Maybe he was waiting for something, or someone, else entirely. And we just happened to wander into his quiet little orbit for a few minutes. The Carnival packed up a few days later. The mirror tent was gone first. Claire and I don't talk about it anymore, really. We broke up a few months after that. Unrelated reasons, just life moving forward. But sometimes if I hear silence fall too suddenly, or pass a trailer lot at night with those faded prize signs flapping in the wind, I get that feeling again. That pressure behind the quiet, like someone is still out there, waiting, just beyond the frame.